guys, this is TV Siblings Podcast for Mr. Robot. This is Sid.
This is Sweta.
And so we're doing a preview for Season 4, the final season. And we'll kind of catch you guys up on where things are at with all our characters as we jump right into the premiere of Season 4.
And so we're missing Harani during this podcast, but hopefully she'll join us for the first episode. But to start with the recap of the first 3 seasons. Season 1 is essentially the Beautiful Mind setup, where Elliot is invited to F Society by Mr. Robot. And he's basically on this path of self-discovery and ultimately comes to the realization that Mr. Robot is himself. And the other major kind of tension in the first season is the fascinating villain Vera, who Elliot ends up breaking out of jail, and Vera unfortunately kills Shayla, Elliot's girlfriend in season 1. And essentially, Elliot comes to realize he really does want this 5-9 hack to happen, and he meets with White Rose. They have their first meeting. They realize that they're on the same page, and the 5-9 hack is ultimately successful. In season 2, we later come to realize that Elliot essentially allows himself to get incarcerated, and much of season 2 happens with Elliot in prison, and he's battling this so-called demon inside of himself, Mr. Robot, and he's really trying to get rid of him because he thinks of him as this evil, unnatural force, and he doesn't want him to be around. But ultimately, that effort is unsuccessful. We get introduced to Leon, who's protecting Elliot through much of his prison stay, and we find out later on that Leon is working for the Dark Army. Meanwhile, what's happening on the outside, Darlene is becoming more and more violent with this revolution. Yeah. And she's basically...
Because now she's the de facto leader of F Society.
Correct.
With Elliot in prison.
Correct. And she decides to set up shop in Madame Executioner, who's one of the top lawyers for E-Corp. And eventually, this E-Corp lawyer comes home, and Darlene ends up murdering her in her own apartment and uses Cisco to help cover it up. Unfortunately, when Cisco is covering up Darlene's mistake, Darlene essentially leaves one of the F Society videotapes in Madame Executioner's apartment. When Cisco goes back to recover one of these tapes, that's what tips off the FBI, and they start coming after Cisco and Darlene. And this is one of our favorite, if not super violent, scenes, but DDP arrives and finds Cisco and Darlene. Moments afterward, the Dark Army shows up, and there's a massive gunfight, or basically a drive-by shooting, and Cisco gets murdered. Darlene gets picked up by the FBI, and at the end of season 2, we see DDP showing Darlene that whole wall that they've been onto him this whole time, and they have a few details incorrect, but Darlene's on that wall, Mobley and Trenton are on that wall, and at the center of it all is Elliot Alderson and Tyrell Wellick. And we also get several scenes with DDP starting to suspect that White Rose is at the center of all of this. She's suspecting the Dark Army more and more, and there's that shootout in China orchestrated by the Dark Army that essentially kills several FBI agents and stems the investigation in China. DDP is also getting more and more suspicious of Santiago, who's her boss, who keeps trying to stem the very appropriate questions she's asking and her investigation of this mysterious character, White Rose. And I think those are most of the major themes of season 2. There was also the mystery of Wellick,
Yeah.
Is Wellick dead? Where is he? And that was a really interesting...
And what happened in those 3 days?
In those 3
Which
days.
we still don't really have an answer to.
Yes, I mean, essentially we do get those scenes from the moment that the hack was instituted, and essentially Irving shows up, whisks Wellick away, and Elliot wakes up in that car parking lot 3 days later. And so my thought is those 3 days actually weren't all that important, just kind of a mystery built into the show. But yes, we find out that Wellick's been working on stage 2. And essentially that's the explosion of the building in New York that would lead to the, destruction of all the backup documents and completing the job that Five9 initially intended to do. And so that's season 2. And then season 3 was an awesome season. But essentially, Elliot's trying to figure out more about stage 2. One of the last moments of season 2 is when there's this amazing scene where Elliot's looking at these buildings. He's trying to figure out what stage 2 is. He's trying to figure out what's real and what's not. And he ultimately decides Mr. Robot's not real, Wellick's not real, but then he gets shot in the stomach, bringing everything full circle. And I forgot a very important character. We didn't even talk about her, but Angela. Angela gets picked up by White Rose. They have that weird, scene with the fish tank in the background and that room. She gets interviewed by someone who looks exactly like she did when she was a kid. And
Same
ultimately, White Rose convinces her of her plan, and Angela becomes immediately involved. Then in season 3, Elliot's doing everything he can to stop stage 2 from happening. He's basically redirecting all of the documents from that main building in New York to 71 different sites across the US. And it's really interesting because Elliot and Mr. Robot are completely opposed, where Elliot's working during the day to redirect the shipping, basically delay stage 2. Mr. Robot's working at night to undo all of that. But ultimately, Tyrell Wellick comes up with a plan, essentially forced by White Rose's timeline, that this needs to happen right now. Wellick comes up with a plan to blow up all 71 buildings, much to Elliot's dismay. He cannot believe this happened, and this is not what Elliot or Mr. Robot wanted to happen. Essentially, Wellick and the Dark Army played their cards, and Philip Price later finds out that it's essentially just White Rose's petty vengeance plan. The 71 E-Corp building explosion and thousands of people dying.
Because you asked me, or you made me ask twice, right? That
Essentially, he was peeved by Philip Price not doing everything he can to stop Angela's exploration and investigation of the Washington Township plant that was so important to White Rose.
It really was. I mean, he said it a few times, but it was a lesson by White Rose for Philip Price.
A slap on the wrist.
Yeah,
so
to understand the pecking order. I'm in charge, and your role that I installed you into is to do my bidding. Let's not make any mistakes about that relationship.
Wellick, basically, essentially gets released. He says that he was captured by the Dark Army and kept prisoner this whole time. And we see this very fascinating conversation between Philip Price and Wellick later on, where Philip Price says he knew all of this was going to happen. And it's because of men like him that allowed this stuff to happen. The hack and so forth.
He says this to Mr. Robot, but Elliot.
Correct. And so the final episode essentially brings us to that barn in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, where Wellick was, nearby the house that Wellick was hiding in, courtesy of the Dark Army for the past, I don't know, how many months.
Correct. Where Darlene was working for the FBI the whole season.
Yeah.
Trying to get them details, but playing that fine balance between not telling them everything, but telling them enough to have her not locked up. But essentially, she takes it one step too far and she sleeps with DDP and gets caught trying to get her badge information and gets thrown in jail. This makes Santiago start to panic, and Santiago essentially is forced in a situation where he feels the need to kill Darlene in order to keep the cover-up alive and keep the fact that he's a mole alive. And while he's taking her to this location, this barn in this unknown location, DDP finally says, "You can't do this. Like, what are you doing right now? This makes no sense. I'm going to call the higher-ups." She gets punched in the face, knocked out, and dragged to this barn along with Darlene. Irving picks up Elliot, who's been trying to find Darlene, and they all end up in this barn together. At this point, Elliot really regrets the 5-9 hack. It's not the way that he wanted their revolution to turn out, because essentially with eCoin, eCorp's going to be just fine, and all the lower class and the middle class are still suffering. And so he's made up his mind at this point that he actually wants to reverse the hack.
Yeah.
He regrets what he did. This is not the way he wanted it to play out. And the 1% is still winning. That they're still getting everything that they want. But essentially, they all end up in this barn. Santiago meets a very gruesome death, and DDP's family gets threatened, so essentially she's forced to become the new mole. Elliot gets away with this whole situation by bargaining with White Rose, saying, I can help you get what you want, where I can make the Washington Township plant move to the Congo along your timeline, and I can help you. And there's this awesome scene where White Rose is number one. He's talking to Elliot. He's like, "What makes you think you're better than an army of hackers just like you?" And he says, "Because I am." And it's so true. He really is special and extraordinary and better than anyone else at what he does. He's not only a brilliant hacker, he's a brilliant problem solver.
Yeah.
And he understands these systems and ways to bypass systems like no one else. Not even White Rose herself. And so, with this bargaining chip, Elliot and Darlene are allowed to go free. And essentially, Elliot undoes the hack. That's one of the last scenes of season 3. Meanwhile, Vera's, we don't know what he's been up to, but he rolls up to Elliot's doorstep, and he will be in season 4.
Yeah. Excited to have him back.
And I think one of the major moments in the final episode of season 3 is Elliot comes to terms with the fact that his dad never pushed him out that window.
Well, he comes to terms with that because Darlene corrects his memory.
Correct.
And it's a cool scene because she says, "I can be your memory for you."
Yes.
Which could prove very vital for season 4.
Actually, absolutely. Where maybe he doesn't need to be such an unreliable narrator. Although, we did see, he asked Darlene for help before. Remember when he said, "Can you follow me when I go out at night?" And she's able to follow him to an extent, but she's not able to stop what Mr. Robot is doing. So I think, yes, she's definitely a valuable asset, but she can't be, she can't fully prevent all of Mr. Robot's wrongdoings.
Yeah, but it provides him more information than he had before. Right?
I also think, this realization, along with the fact that, hey, maybe me and Mr. Robot can actually work together, I think plays into what we're going to see in season 4. Where I think we're finally going to see Elliot and Mr. Robot working alongside each other against a common enemy.
I agree.
And that's White Rose.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
And then Angela. I think Angela's been always this wild card of a character where it's really easy to disregard her importance, but she played a pivotal role in making Stage 2 happen. And what we see in the last episode of season 3 is Philip Price lets her know, "Hey, I'm your dad." And she comes to terms with the fact that she was manipulated by White Rose. And her role in killing thousands of people, that's something that she's going to have to come to terms with and accept. Where there's never going to be a payoff that makes all of that worth it. And I think, she requests of Philip Price, help me get revenge. And he kind of tells her in, I think, a very fatherly way, no, you have to accept this and move on. So I think that's the, summary of the first 3 seasons. Did you appreciate anything differently on a rewatch?
I don't think so. There's little details here and there that you appreciate, but I think overall it's still an amazing experience from beginning to end. And that's more a credit to Sam Esmail in that even during rewatches, it still feels tense. It still feels like you're invested in the story and where it's going, which is awesome.
I think for me, there's a couple details and a couple big things I realized on a rewatch. One of the fascinating details is when Mr. Robot first brings Elliot to F Society. Everyone there, Darlene and Trenton, they're just kind of staring at Elliot, not saying anything like, who are you, welcome, this or that, because they know him. He's the one that brought all of them together and brought this here. And whenever they do interact with him, they're looking, basically the way that Elliot and Mr. Robot are standing, they're looking in one direction, talking to one person. And I thought that was really, really cool, how Elliot didn't even realize that, and we didn't realize that, but they're one person, and the way that that's filmed and the way that they interact with him makes so much more sense on a rewatch, and I thought that was really cool. Once again, credit to Sam Esmail, where it plays both ways.
Yeah, that's true. On a rewatch, all the details are there to provide you enough evidence that Mr. Robot does not exist and that he's in Elliot's head. Very much like if you were to rewatch Fight Club, you would see the details that Tyler Durden isn't really there.
Absolutely. Same thing with the scene where Wellick finally reemerges and sits next to Elliot in the taxi, and Elliot starts freaking out. And you just seen from Wellick's perspective how important this moment was, this reunion with his godlike partner, and Elliot's just freaking out, like, is this guy real? Like, can you tell me if you see him? And I thought that was really, really cool, seeing it from both perspectives.
I think another detail that became more prevalent and obvious on the rewatch is that is more about the strength, intelligence, and capabilities of the Dark Army. White Rose had this faith in Elliot that her number one lieutenant could not see, and was ultimately his downfall. But on a practical sense, everything he did was correct. He was very honest, saying, you're being very emotional about some of your decision making.
Correct.
We did not need to do the 71 building attack.
Correct.
It was completely necessary, which forced us to have all these issues about getting your plant over to the Congo.
Correct.
All the result because you want to teach Philip Price a lesson.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think, and his name is Grant, I just looked it up.
Correct, yeah.
This is something that, as much as I love Elliot, this is something that I've always struggled with. He is so unreliable, right? He's mentally unstable. He goes back and forth between his personalities with what he wants to do. And Grant tries to point this out to White Rose, like, hey, maybe we should use someone else, or maybe I could do this, And this is something that's really fascinating. White Rose really believes in Elliot. She believes in his abilities. And Sam Esmail talks about this. They share this rage against the way things are right now.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you, though. We see White Rose's weaknesses a lot more on a second rewatch, where she's this insanely smart and formidable character, but she acts based on passion, and she acts based on pettiness and pride and arrogance. And
also idealistic beliefs.
Correct.
In that I believe this person's talent will overcome this person's deficiencies. Case in point, Elliot.
Which is fascinating. I think while you were just talking, I realized that that's one of the most dangerous things about White Rose, is she almost has unlimited resources. Where when she's acting in her capacity in the Chinese government, she has the Chinese government's backing. When she's kind of moving the chess pieces on a world political stage. But then in the Dark Army side of things, she has unlimited resources and no restrictions or constraints on moving things along that piece of things too. So it's kind of fascinating to see how truly powerful she is and how literally nothing can stop her because she has unlimited money, unlimited people, and unlimited resources. It's kind of fascinating.
And so that's a nice transition into what we think is going to happen in season 4, like our upcoming theories. And one detail that we should touch on that I think you maybe briefly mentioned in the season 3 finale, one big development in tandem with Elliot saying he wants to work with, or sorry, Mr. Robot saying he wants to work with Elliot more and have more open lines of communication, which we obviously know is going to set up for season 4 that they're going to actually finally work together in an honest fashion. Another detail that happens in that conversation is Elliot saying one huge benefit of all the bullshit he's been through is that he now knows who's the real enemy. That 1% of the 1%.
Correct.
And who's part of that circle? White Rose, Dark Army, and I don't know, whoever else encompasses that, he's going to go after. And for him, this is his new objective, his new target. And I think a big part of season 4 will be, Elliot versus White Rose. Elliot versus Dark Army. That's going to be the main source of conflict. With it even if you were to dive into it further, White Rose trying to achieve whatever her plan is, which we still don't know what it is, and Elliot trying to stop that just for the sake that he cannot allow White Rose to get away with whatever she wants.
Absolutely. I think the 71 building explosion just shocked him. Like, how could...
Shocked Mr. Robot more than Elliot, which is fascinating.
I think both.
Well, but Elliot's, empathetic, understanding. To shock Mr. Robot was surprising, because he was like, this is not what I wanted.
But I think from Mr. Robot's perspective, it was more, I'm the leader of this revolution. How could this decision happen without my consent? And this isn't the people we were supposed to go after. So I think it was more, he was kind of slighted by this happening.
Even beyond that, not like slighted doesn't give enough power behind what he's feeling. It was the fact that he was not in charge.
Correct. That
things happened that he was not aware of, and that his plan was not really his plan.
Correct.
He was actually another pawn, which was not illuminated to him until, I think, Irving in the beginning a little bit, saying, hey, those guys are partying, like with hours after, 71 buildings were destroyed, and, thousands, maybe millions of people have died. They don't care, right? It was all part of their day-to-day, paired with Philip Price saying, you really think the 5/9 hack was engineered by a lone hacker and that no one in power knew about it? No, we knew about it. We allowed it to happen.
What's fascinating is I actually think that White Rose must have looped Philip Price in, because there's actually no other way Philip Price would have found out about that. They were a very small group of hackers that were acting independently and carefully. And the only other wild cards in all of this, the Dark Army, obviously, that were involved, and Wellick. And Wellick obviously didn't go tell Philip Price what was going on. So it must have been White Rose who clued in Philip Price to the hack.
So one part of me thinks was Philip Price just bragging for the sake of bragging and putting up a front, because I go back to that scene, that extra credit scene at the end of season 1 where Philip Price and White Rose are at some bougie 1% the 1% party, and Philip Price is clearly upset because the hack had just happened that day, and White Rose talking to him about it, and he's like, don't worry about it, we have it controlled, we know who did it. It seemed like a conversation of, this is my problem, don't worry about it, there's nothing to do with you. That's why some part of me makes me think that Philip Price is bullshitting in that scene, but it's hard to tell.
It's hard to tell. Well, tell me about your theories for season 4.
It's funny because this is a credit again to Sam Esmail. I still have no idea what White Rose's plan is. There's theories, obviously, that she wants to create some kind of virtual reality world. If you want to go even more extreme, go more into the fringe science, that she's literally trying to get access to a parallel universe or something. I have a feeling it might be more, grounded, whatever the solution is or whatever the objective is, just because that's the world that Sam Esmail is building and creating.
Correct.
He usually creates these lofty goals of illusion of what it could be, and then you're really brought back down to earth, like, oh wait, you actually thought that was going to happen? This is the reality of the situation. So part of me, and that was another thing we didn't talk about, or I didn't mention, on the rewatch, I became more skeptical of everything White Rose said. She seemed like she was telling every single person she interacted with what they wanted to hear to get that person's buy-in. And so I became very skeptical about what she's actually trying to achieve.
But I think on the flip side, she obviously was so passionate about annexing the Congo,
yes,
moving the Washington
100%.
Township to the Congo.
Yep.
Personally very passionate about this, personally very upset when there were delays to this plan.
Yeah.
I think she really does care a lot about this project, but I agree with you that she spins this project in a way to manipulate other people and get their buy-in, but I do think that there is a project and something really important to her. The second thing is Grant and the rest of the Dark Army are super loyal to her. And I don't think it's because she just told them what they wanted to hear. I think that they also believe in this project to a certain extent, enough to give their lives for. I don't think it's kind of like a gang situation where they're so, worried for their lives that they're just going along with whatever's happening. I think it's more the former, where they actually believe in the project. So...
And that's the tough part. I think I'm a little bit worried that Sam Esmail has wrote himself into a corner where he's created this very lofty goal for White Rose.
I don't think so. So here's my theory on a second rewatch. I was always very skeptical watching things the first time around, kind of rolling my eyes. I hope they don't go to time travel. I hope they don't go to this parallel universe. But there was a Black Mirror episode called San Junipero that, won a bunch of awards. And essentially it was this idea of a simulated reality where you could basically get connected to the supercomputer and live whatever reality you wanted to live. And I actually think that that's the most consistent thing between what White Rose has said and what Angela believes to be true. My mom can come back. We can change things. No one has to die. I don't think it's time travel, so to speak. I think it's more creating a reality that's different. And I personally believe that White Rose would be so motivated by this goal because she's a transgender and was born into a reality she was never comfortable with. And so creating a space where she could truly be herself, I think that's something that would drive her to do all these extraordinary things and push her with ambition.
Yeah, my only negative and retort to that is I have a hard time seeing her convincing everyone in the world to jump into this new virtual reality world she's created. You're basically saying that she's creating the Matrix. It's the plot to the Matrix.
Yeah.
Everyone is mentally jacked into this virtual world where their lives are playing out in a very mundane way.
Although the Matrix is more of a forced situation, I personally think it would be more optional, but either way, I agree with you. There are some details that I haven't quite figured out how it would work, but I do think that that's realistic and not super science fiction-y, which I would have a hard time buying into. And I also think that would be the explanation for the blackouts we kept seeing, or the brownouts we kept seeing, where there literally is a giant energy sucking source that's feeding into a machine that White Rose has built.
Maybe. Although she only has one plant, so that means the power is consuming enough that affects New York City.
Correct.
Which could be true. But they're moving it to the Congo, that entire plant. So I guess we might be able to see this season if there's any, any change to the brownouts or blackouts that occur.
Yeah. I only caught this on a second rewatch, but Irving has this great line where he's looking at a book and he says, yeah, the beginning was okay, the middle was okay, but the ending was bad. You really have to have a good ending for a story to be good. And that kind of got me excited because I really don't think Sam Esmail is going to let us down. Whatever it is, I think it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to make sense. And I think it's a story he's wanted to tell from the very beginning, where he isn't kind of writing it as he goes along. I think that it is going to make sense and be satisfying at the end of it.
I mean, I hope so, right? I hope so. Yeah, let's go through the characters. We talked a little bit about White Rose. Obviously, there's going to be a conflict between her and Elliot. DDP, how is she going to be as a dark army mole in the FBI?
I just don't see it happening. As much as her hands are tied, I think it's so opposite to her character that I just don't see her going along the same way Santiago did.
I really feel like her only option, well, she has two options. It's kind of morbid. She could kill herself to just end the relationship she has with Dark Army, and hopefully that helps her family out, because it's kind of pointless for for the Dark Army to kill her family if DDB's not around. That was their leverage. But what's probably going to happen is she's going to somehow work with Elliot in some capacity in secret. And it's possible, right? If she is the contact point for the Dark Army in the FBI, but she's working with Elliot, she may be able to deflect any information that's being fed to the Dark Army and protect herself while she works with Elliot.
I can see that.
Yeah, that's the only way I can see her storyline being interesting or relevant, or even having a redemption arc for Elliot, for DP. And Wellick.
I was just thinking about Wellick. I was like, what's he gonna do?
I mean, there was a scene in the trailer for season 4 where he's on Elliot's computer in his apartment. I mean, Wellick could be another person that comes to work with them, and it could be it could be a team up of all of them against Dark Army. I do not think Angela's going to play a very significant role, just because she needs to mentally get rehabbed, and I just don't see Philip Price being involved. I mean, when he gives his advice to Angela being that you need to just move on, there's nothing we can do, that means he's already given up as well.
I agree with all that, yeah. I don't see Wellick just letting it go. He does not seem like the type of person to just let things go. And the way we left him in season 3, he just got the CTO job at eCorp, but it's basically just a shadow role. He's just basically a puppet in that position. I don't see him stopping at that. I think he's gonna play a role in season 4, essentially helping Elliot.
Yeah. And unfortunately, as much as I hate to say this, I think there might be a high chance that we do not get a happy ending in the show, especially for Elliot. It's just because White Rose is such a formidable adversary that it would take some significant mistakes that she makes for Elliot to beat her. And I just do not see many scenarios where Elliot is able to achieve that. But, I mean, like you brought up, there are weaknesses to White Rose. She is compulsive. She does get emotional about certain decisions. And that is Elliot's only play to beat her. But I don't know. I just have a hard time seeing how that's going to play out. Especially with Vera in the mix, who is clearly going to be like a season 4 adversary for Elliot, but more of a distraction from the main issues he's going to have with White Rose.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see Elliot being able to fully focus on White Rose, and I just don't think it. I hate to say it, but I don't think it's going to end up well for our boy.
We do see them interact in a season 4 trailer, though, where White Rose and Elliot meet face to face.
Which is something you pointed out, that the first time they meet, White Rose is very, very clear. This will be the first and last time we meet. I've already allotted the time that you deserve. So for White Rose to break that rule and meet with him again, or maybe Elliot forces the issue, that's a significant change. All right, so if there's anything else, any other theories you want to put out there? Or is that a good wrap up as we lead into season 4 tonight?
I think those are my major thoughts.
Okay.
I'm super excited for season 4. Like I said, I have full faith in Sam Esmail. I think he's really thought about the story. And the show, it's every single episode, every single moment of the show, you can tell there's so much thought behind it. And so I'm just really looking forward to seeing how the story plays out.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Swetha. That was perfect.
And we love our boy Rami.
We love Rami, love Sam Esmail, love DDP. We have a soft spot for Tyrell Wellick.
Yeah, even though he's a psycho murderer, there's just something about him that we're secretly rooting for him. And Darlene, she's had quite a rough story. She's lost Cisco. She carries the guilt of everything that's happened. DDP has some scathing words for her at the end of season 3. And it's tough, but hopefully there's some light at the end of the tunnel for her.
So Swetha, with 13 episodes left, so roughly, maybe around 13 hours of this Mr. Robot universe left to us in story. If you could say one moment or scene that you would really, really want to happen in these final 13 hours, what would it be?
That's really interesting. Well, I think the thing that I've been waiting for this whole series is, what is White Rose after? And so we're definitely going to get that. So yeah. I think that's probably the moment that I'm waiting for the most. What about you?
Well, I would just like to comment on what you're looking for. I'm worried that we might be disappointed.
I don't see that happening, though. I know.
I mean, Sam Esmail has never let us down. I hope we find that out early on, just so we get to see White Rose trying to achieve that goal.
What's also fascinating is when Philip Price is talking to Angela at the end of season 3, he seems to know.
Yeah. And
at least he knows the surface level. Maybe White Rose has never fully shared with anyone what she's truly after. But he does seem to know the project that she's so invested in, the Congo, the Washington Township plant. He seems to know that piece of things. And he brushes it off as delusional and crazy and fantasy. Something that he doesn't really believe is possible, which is really interesting to me. And it's interesting because we see the scene with Terry Colby and Philip Price, and we see a separate scene with Angela and Philip Price. Both take place in his office. When they kind of call him out, like, Terry Colby is amazed. Like, the Congo, what part of the world are you not involved in?
Yeah.
And this project seems so random to me. Angela, she's looking at the poster on the wall with Francis Ferdinand and the start of, World War I. And Philip Price has always been about ambition and being the most important person in the room. That's how he sees. He's after power. I think White Rose is after something different.
Yeah.
And that's what's always been one of the most fascinating mysteries about the show. Not a subtle mystery. Obviously, it's something that Sam Esmail's been building, but that's the moment that I'm looking forward to the most.
So I'm going to cheat and give you 2 moments.
No, that's okay.
The first one is kind of related to your moment that you want to see, which is, White Rose's plan, just the reveal. Mine would be, and I think we're going to get this, is a flashback to Ellie's dad and Angela's mom, and us seeing them actually working on whatever project this is that ultimately caused their deaths. And maybe even some interaction with White Rose, a younger White Rose. I think we're going to get some kind of scene with them working on it in the past. And which gives us more details as to what they were trying to achieve.
Actually, I just read this crazy theory, which actually could be true. There's nothing we've seen that's pointed against this. What if Edward Alderson is actually still alive? We see him have the heart attack in the movie theater and kind of pass out and unconscious, but we don't know that that's the moment of his death. We see the tombstone and, there's basically a spot in the graveyard for him, but there's actually no evidence that he's actually dead. And Elliot's mom is clearly not in the state to be able to say something one way or the other. She's in that retirement home by herself. And maybe Darlene doesn't know. She was a young kid at the time. And so that would be really interesting for him to somehow be alive. But I don't know. I'm not that invested one way or the other. But it is an interesting fan theory.
Yeah, maybe. The other moment I really wanted to see, and it has zero impact on the story, it's just more for the fans and the viewers and for Elliot, is for him to have some interaction with that dude from Steel Mountain that he horribly offended, and just maybe apologize or just check in on him, make sure he's okay.
Fulfill a little bit of the redemption arc.
Yeah. I actually feel like we're gonna see him in some random scene. Just to kind of, I think Sam Esmail really likes tying everything together.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of like a loose end that's there that, it'd be nice to kind of tie off that thread.
Yeah.
That's it for me, though. You're good on your end?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, cool. So thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, this was just our first podcast for the final season, Mr. Robot. It's kind of sad, but exciting at the same time.
It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be great. All right. Thanks for listening. See you guys soon.
Bye.
Bye.